Trustees member call. We're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Kristen Zilkowski, and I just want to let folks know that if you are interested in asking a question and you're online, please use the chat feature, and we'll try and field those as they arrive. If you're on the phone, don't worry. We're going to unmute folks at the conclusion of the call and leave plenty of time for questions. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ed Potosnik.
Good morning, everyone. Ed Potosnik. I'm Executive Director of New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. First, I want to start off by saying thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us for the interest in this important conversation. We have an expert with us, Helen Madison from Trister, Ross, Shatler & Gold, based in Washington, D.C., who's going to really give a background and landscape of sort of what's at stake in New Jersey and how it fits into the larger picture. But my role this morning is to give you a little background of sort of how we got to where we are. So this morning we're talking about a disclosure bill, which on the surface and in the headlines seems like a really good thing. It's referred to as the dark money bill, and it's referenced to get dark money out of politics. One thing I just want to make really clear is when folks are using the word politics, what they're referring to in general are two different sort of buckets of activity. One, elections. Most people connect politics to elections. A candidate is up for office and folks want to support that person because that's someone that's going to advance their mission, whether it's women's health care or the environment or freedoms. Or oppose someone because they're, not living up to the expectations of an organization. I think for most people, when they hear politics, they think getting dark money out of politics, that's what they're referring to. Under the surface of this legislation enters into a new realm. And in this general term that people throw around of politics, it actually refers to public policy. Public policy would include the development of legislation, that's with the New Jersey Assembly and the New Jersey Senate, and regulation, and that would be with anything in the executive branch. So the Division of Motor Vehicles, or all the way through all the Department of Education, Environment, the Department of Community Affairs. So it also regulates that area. And that's where this bill became really problematic. The legislature worked on this from about January to May of this year. And somewhere along the process, they amended the bill to include legislation and regulation and to apply the rules of politics or election spending onto the realm of working to advance and improve public policy. So things like getting a bunch of people down to the State House and testifying and making their voice be heard, or the work that we do at the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters and other environmental partners to make sure our members are active and able to shape public policy. All of those things are now counted. And so I just want to be clear. So that politics really has two buckets. One bucket is elections. I think that's what people think of first when they think of politics. Election spending, get dark money out of election spending. And where this bill has ventured into and opened up a whole new realm is in the public policy space. And that's developing legislation and improving it, and also regulations through the executive branch, things that the governor might be working on. It has, in that realm, focused on one particular type of entity that these new rules apply to. And I'll go over what the rules are in a second. But 501c4 organizations, like the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, is a non-tax deductible tax status. They're a nonprofit. We are also nonpartisan. And we work to advance good laws that protect people's health and our environment for generations to come. That's what we do. Other 501c4s include the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, Garden State Equality, Working Families Alliance, Blue Wave New Jersey, and the list grows with like Citizen Action and others. And all of these groups were created because when folks give money to us, we can then use that money to improve public policy. Some of groups that are C4s actually get involved in elections. They support candidates or put out endorsements, and some groups don't. Some C4s are created just so that they can raise that money that's not tax deductible and use it without a cap, like a 501c3, which is a tax deductible entity. They have a cap of how much money they can spend on lobbying. They can never do endorsements. or get involved in politics, as we refer to as elections. But they can get involved in policy, but they're under a cap, which sort of moves by how big your budget is. So a 501c4 does not have that cap of how much money they could spend in advancing legislation or regulation. And that's why we created that, so folks can give and know that we're moving a pro-conservation agenda. In targeting just 501c4 organizations with new requirements, what they left out was 501c6s. So this is like a little bit of all these different C's. So we have the C3s, which are tax deductible, your typical nonprofits like American Cancer Society, your C4s, which are advocacy organizations, not tax deductible, can spend unlimited amounts on moving policy. And if they want to, can actually endorse or support candidates, saying they're good or bad. And then C6s, which are trade associations, the biggest one being the Chamber of Commerce or New Jersey Business and Industry Association or the Chemical Council or the Petroleum Institute. This bill does not apply to those 501c6s, those trade associations that spend millions of dollars every year in trying to shape public policy so that they can make more money on the backs of New Jerseyans, on the backs of New Jerseyans' ability to have clean air and clean water. And I think we've seen that with a toxic legacy in our state. C6s, trade associations, corporations that hide in there, in the darkness, do not see any new disclosure under this bill. Meanwhile, groups like ours that get out the citizens face a number of new disclosure requirements. So I'm going to go over those, and Alan's going to have a chance to get more in detail. But the first is that if we spend $3,000 in getting our members out to a hearing to speak their mind and let politicians understand what's at stake with something that's before them that they're considering, we have to disclose every donor that has given us $10,000 or more. Now again, C6s, the folks that are at the Chamber of Commerce and any corporations that give to them to, let's say, stop fighting for the minimum wage, so they're fighting against raising the minimum wage, we never know where that money's coming from. All we know is they've spent money fighting raising the minimum wage, or advancing clean energy policies. We don't know that some polluter is actually funding their efforts to stop addressing stop policies to help address climate change. So that's the number one thing. For us as an organization in the state of New Jersey, we're based in New Jersey. That means our state work. If someone were to spend, if someone were to spend, if we were to spend $3,000, we'd have to disclose all our $10,000 donors. For organizations that have chapters that are run out of Washington, D.C., like Planned Parenthood, who also opposes this legislation, I believe it's the ACLU, Environment America, Sierra Club, that would also work that all the donors that give to the national organization, $10,000 or more, would also be disclosed. Again, these corporate interests, these trade associations, still in the darkness. It also bars elected officials from being involved in running or operating or managing a C4. So likely if they wanted to sit on a board of a C4, that would not be a possibility. One little caveat that I want to highlight as well, under the guise of saying that this is a dark money bill, they also increase the threshold of reporting for independent expenditure committees. This is also what we call super PACs. So everyone's heard of the super PACs. People can give unlimited amounts in an election, and uncoordinated super PACs can spend on behalf or against a candidate. Prior to this bill going into effect, which would happen on October 15th, super PACs would have to disclose any donor over $300. So in this legislation, they've jacked that up 333%. So there is 333% more darkness now in super PACs, and they raised that up to $10,000 for the minimum reporting threshold. So that means anyone who gives $10,000 or less is going to be in the darkness. So I think it's important for folks to know that there's actually going to be more dark money in elections because super PACs have their reporting threshold raised from $300, 333% to $10,000. So what happened with the bill? So the bill moved through the legislature, and these trade associations are so powerful that when they were added on a Thursday in one of the committees, they lasted Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to see the same reporting requirements that small nonprofits like ours were being applied. And by Monday morning, they were removed, and under special emergency, the bill was voted on in both chambers and sent to the governor. The governor then looked at the bill, Governor Phil Murphy and his team, and did a conditional veto to repair some of these very egregious problems. The legislature, I'm not going to get too much into the politics here, but there is some discontent between the legislature and the executive branch. That's not uncommon in the balance of powers that the way they are in across the United States or even in Washington, D.C. But there's a little bit of a tug of war. The legislature decided that they were going to override the governor's conditional veto. And in a deal that they struck, the governor would sign this bill, which I call a disclosure bill. I also refer to it as a partial disclosure bill because these big corporate profit-driven polluting entities are hidden, that they would pass a fixed bill if the governor were to sign this disclosure bill. So the governor lived up to his end of the bargain. He signed a disclosure bill. And then suddenly there was amnesia among leadership in the legislature. I think since then it's been corrected, and there's some indication that they said there was going to be a fix. But as of today, the bill goes into effect in just a few days on October 15th. There is no fix. And that is a problem because, as I've elucidated, there are a number of serious concerns, the biggest of which is the unfairness, where corporate profit-driven entities are hiding in the dark. We won't know where they're getting their money as they're advocating for policies. And small, citizen-led, with individual donors, family donors, your neighbors supporting are going to be sort of rooted out, and it's going to come at a disadvantage because folks may not give, knowing that their neighbors will know that they've given. And this was indicated, and Alan, you can go more into the details of the harm. I'm not going to go there, but already some groups are seeing that, and some groups are deciding in this fall not to get involved in some of the things they had been doing in the past. So just real quick, C4s, like the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, have been caught in the crosshairs of a political battle between the legislature and the governor. And within that, these new rules that are going into effect have tilted the balance from very powerful corporations that hide under the guise of trade associations, that they're going to be more powerful, while citizen-led, small donor-driven, and advocacy organizations like ours are going to be put at a disadvantage. And it's not surprising, they were only in for a few days that these C6s got removed because they are so powerful. And we had been working for months, almost an entire year, to make changes to no avail with the legislature on this bill. But these groups were able to be removed very quickly. And also just to reinforce that when we talk about politics, we have to be careful to be more specific and talk about elections, spending money for or against the candidate, and also talking about politics, this general term people have been throwing around when we're talking about legislation or regulation, influencing public policy. Those are two buckets under politics. This bill includes both of those. And I think what you'll hear from Alan is this is really unusual and something folks should be very concerned about. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Alan. Alan Madison represents nonprofit organizations and labor organizations, political professionals on campaigns and tax matters and corporate matters. Whether you're trying to establish a corporation that's a nonprofit, or you're trying to look as a corporation like we are, a C4 or C6, C3, we're not a C6. He's really one of the go-to guys. He's a leading expert in the United States of America. He has a really strong background and works with a dynamic team in Washington, D.C. To see how states are handling issues like this, and also the federal government, whether it's disclosure rules or IRS reporting or finances, and ensuring that folks like us are able to stay within the bounds of all the laws, and also keep an eye out for any laws that may harm our ability to achieve our mission. So with that, I pass it off to Alan.
Hey, thanks, Ed. And thanks to everyone who's joined the call today. I'll give a short overview of some of the legal issues, then we'll open it up to questions. I guess there are a couple of issues I just wanted to mention and give a little bit of the context for how the courts have addressed these issues. The core issue is a First Amendment issue of free speech and of the right of individuals to associate. And there's a free speech right to be able to give anonymously to organizations without friends and neighbors knowing what organizations you support. And for a group like New Jersey LCV, it may not be that big a deal of whether you're giving, unless, of course, you work for Monsanto or you work for BP. And you might not want your supervisors knowing that you're giving money to New Jersey LCV because although you're an engineer at some sort of at a refinery, you care about clean water and you're supporting an organization that's standing up against your employer. So there's a risk there of coming out to your employer as being an environmentalist, as a conservationist. If you live in a conservative neighborhood, you might not want your neighbors knowing that you're giving to Planned Parenthood or the ACLU or to the Human Rights Campaign supporting gay rights. You might not want your parents to know that you're giving to a gay rights organization. So there's a First Amendment right in your privacy to give to organizations that you support. It's offset by the need for disclosure in the election context of who's funding elections, which has never been more important than right now, of who's behind the money that's trying to tell you to vote for one candidate versus another. And the Supreme Court has said that there's a balancing to be done. In the election influencing context, people who are supporting communications that expressly advocate for or against candidates, there's disclosure allowed for that. In the legislative context or regulatory context, because you're not trying to influence elections, you're merely trying to influence public policy, your First Amendment right as an individual to contribute or as an organization to organize together trumps the public's right to know who's funding it, because the attempt to influence legislation is not as fundamental as influencing an election. And that's just the way the courts have come down on this. And there's a court case right now challenging this New Jersey bill because it goes too far in terms of what's allowed for what's allowed under the First Amendment. So that's sort of that's the context of the First Amendment issues. This particular bill has two real vulnerabilities. In addition to, so the first is that it's overbroad. As I mentioned, the Supreme Court has only allowed for disclosure of donors related to elections, not related to trying to influence legislation. And this bill goes too far. And it originally, as Ed mentioned, it originally just addressed elections, which would be constitutionally permissible, and it would have sailed through, and the state wouldn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars having to defend it in court. But due to the politics in the New Jersey State Senate, the words legislation and regulation got amended and inserted into the bill. So that makes it overly broad. The other part of the overbreadth here is most disclosure bills, to meet constitutional muster, tie the disclosure to the amount of spending that you're doing. So if you're an organization that's spending $100,000 trying to influence an election, you might have to disclose $100,000 worth of donors. Under this bill, there's none of that. Under this bill, if you're an organization that's spending $100,000 trying to influence legislation, you might have to disclose $10 million worth of your donors. So for example, if some national organization comes into New Jersey and works on influencing legislation, they might have to disclose all of their donors all across the country. Or if a local YMCA is trying to influence the child care regulations to strengthen the state regulations relating to child care, they might have to disclose all donors over $10,000 to their organization, even though they only spent $10,000 trying to influence this regulation. They wind up disclosing millions of dollars worth of donors to the state YMCA, for example. So the rule is overly broad. And as it was being written, New Jersey LCV tried to weigh in and help them save it from these overbreadth issues that make it constitutionally vulnerable but those who were writing the bill said, no, 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 we know what we're doing. We want to get this done this way. And the other issue that Ed mentioned, and I just, and that's important here, is this exclusion for the trade associations, which simultaneously, while it's written overly broadly, it applies to a very narrow slice of groups, only to these Section 501c4 organizations, which tend to be local or national grassroots advocacy organizations that advocate based around issues. So the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, environmental groups. It only applies to that slice of organizations, but not to trade associations, the Chamber of Commerce, the American Chemical Association, the very groups that we're fighting against. And they had an opportunity, and in fact they did, when it was pointed out to them, they reinserted the language to broaden it so that it would be both sides of these fights, so that the grassroots organizations and these big trade groups would all have to disclose. And as Ed said, and it's an irony here, that the big powerful groups that are doing the most to influence legislation and regulation were the ones that got this taken out of the legislation so that they're not covered at all anymore. And when we raised this with some of the bill sponsors, they said, well, there's nothing we could do. They got it taken out. They were more powerful than you. And when you think about what that means is, what it means is that the weakest groups that aren't backed by big industry money, but are backed by individuals, are going to be the ones that suffer the greatest harm from this bill. Whereas the groups that are the ones who are exercising undue influence, the sponsors of the bill made an affirmative decision to let them off the hook. Essentially, the sponsors of the bill allowed unilateral disarmament, where the organizations that are grassroots organizations are going to have to disclose their donors, who are individuals in local communities, and these organizations that represent big corporate interests aren't going to disclose who's behind their spending. And that's just a policy decision that the politicians made in order to get their bill passed. They wanted to make it look like there was action happening. They wanted to make it look like something was being done about dark money. And so they made a decision of which groups to regulate and which ones they'd let off the hook. And they say, well, we'll get around to doing them sometime in the future, maybe. We'll see. So where do we go from here? Well, there's a lawsuit that was filed by a conservative organization called Americans for Prosperity. And they're fighting this on First Amendment grounds. They're recognizing some of the deficiencies in the bill, the same things that I've outlined. Some of these conservative organizations recognize the same deficiencies, and they're fighting it. And they're pushing for the judge to enjoin the bill sometime before it goes into effect on October 15th. And until that happens, we'll just have to wait and see. But I do know that from my clients, I've already had clients whose donors have become skittish. I've had clients who are New Jersey nonprofit organizations that I'm not going to get into which ones, but they've received blowback from donors who said, I was going to contribute. I don't know the status of what's going on with this bill, but I support your efforts to influence policy, as you know, but because of this New Jersey bill, I just don't feel comfortable having my identity disclosed publicly, given my business, given what companies I work for or what have you. So that's where we stand. Ed?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I just want to be really clear with New Jersey LCB's position. While the ACLU and others have talked a lot about First Amendment and not having disclosure with regard to that, we've left that to those groups. And in fact, our position is we support disclosure as long as it's full and fair across all the different groups that are doing and engaged in the activities that's requiring disclosure. So that's where the unfairness and the real tipping of the scales. The thumb is put on the scales for these corporate interests because they're seeing no new disclosure under a bill when they're by far spending more money in these types of activities.
Right. There's two things that I should have emphasized. One is making the New Jersey LCB argued in favor of disclosure as long as it was tied to the amount of spending that the organization is doing so that it would pass constitutional muster. New Jersey LCB tried to work with the bill sponsors to save the legislation from the very lawsuits that Americans for Prosperity are pushing. And two, making sure that it covers all of the players who are trying to do this attempt to influence legislation. New Jersey LCB was entirely willing to allow for its own disclosure in order for the greater good of ferreting out the money that's trying to influence elections.
And I think that's really important. I know there's a lot of feigned confusion out there about, how is this bill an environmental issue? Or why are they trying to hide? And the truth is, what we're trying to do is actually daylight those entities, the 501c6 trade or associations that are engaged in similar types of advocacy, trying to advance policy as what we're facing. And it's an environmental issue because the folks that we're fighting against are, they're not coming to the fight with the same tools. They're actually highly advantaged. So it's, kind of like we have rocks and they have bazookas. And that's really unfair and unfortunate. And the folks that are out there and some in the legislature sort of pretending there's no problem here, that it's a false narrative, are putting a deaf ear on real concerns. And that's because they're favoring these corporations that are spending lots more money probably in their elections. And we'll get a chance to see that, after the elections go. But this was really important for us to have a chance to talk directly with you all, our members, so you could hear firsthand about a very complicated issue and understand where we're coming from. We want full disclosure that applies to everyone across the board, a fair, level playing field to advance policies that protect our future generations, to protect their air, water, and land, and to clean up the legacy pollution in the state of New Jersey. We have more toxic Superfund sites than any other state in the nation. So that's what we're here to kind of give you that background. Now, there probably are a ton of questions. If you do have one, Kristen indicated you can click the chat box at the bottom. It's like it looks like a cartoon bubble. It's got 3 dots in it. And if you don't see it, it's maybe because your window's too small, and that's okay. You can click the More button that has 3 dots, and from there you'll see chat. And you can, if you're on your computer, you can type in questions. But I also noticed there's a lot of people who just dialed in, and they're not on their computer. So I'm going to pass it back to Kristen. She has a plan to handle these questions.
Yes, we're going to go ahead and unmute you. And if there's background noise, we'll individually mute folks. But otherwise, the line is open for questions.
And folks can mute themselves too. If you have mute on your phone and you're doing your dishes or something, which is cool, just hit mute and then you don't have to worry about us hearing your clinking. Any questions from folks?
The prospect for fixing it through the courts. Any read?
It depends on how you define fixing it. I think the courts are likely to reject the bill and just toss it out as being overbroad. It's possible, essentially a very similar bill in the early 80s came forward in New Jersey, and the courts did what they described as surgery to excise the regulation in the bill of legislation and regulatory action. The very things that are the problems with this bill were surgically removed from a previous bill. My suspicion, and it's just a guess, I think the court is likely to toss this out for the very reasons we discussed, and that they're not going to fix it. That courts don't view their role necessarily as being a surgical fix to something like this, where the legislation is I don't think the courts are going to want to be that activist in terms of rewriting this bill to make it acceptable, but we'll see. It's possible that they will It's possible that they'll fix it. I think that what we're going to see, though, is that this was a blown opportunity. I think the courts are going to reject it, and then this will get mired again back in the legislature, and we'll be left at the starting line without any real disclosure of dark money, which will be too bad. I think that the state had an opportunity here to write a bill that was fair and balanced, as Ed mentioned. And I think that if it gets rejected, maybe they'll go back and recognize what the constitutional infirmaries were and write a bill that's going to pass muster the second time.
Yeah. I am very sorry. I can't stop my phone from taking over my computer somehow. One of the questions that we have, and this builds on the question we just had, which was, what's going to happen through the courts? Likely, as Alan said, the courts are not going to go through and rewrite the bill. That's what lawmakers do. They make laws. And if they, in the next few days, if they stay the bill, I think that's the official term, they reject it, then it goes back to the drawing board with the legislature. And I will say that my assessment is the legislature has not really been open to changes over the last, 6 months, and even now, there's a lot of defensive posturing, saying there's no problem here, everything's fine, don't look behind the curtain, let's stick with the headlines, getting dark money out of politics, and they don't really want people to understand the true implications of the law. And that's where we all come in. So someone asked, what can we all do? And what you can do is contact your lawmaker and let them know, we're watching you. We understand that under the hood, a wolf in sheep's clothing lies, that this bill has problems and that you have possible solutions. And here at New Jersey LCV and with our partner organizations that we've been working on, we have lots of solutions that they can choose through from like a menu. But one of them is to not work in the area of legislation and regulation and just stick to elections. If this bill were just an election bill, everyone would be fine with it. It's not. They overreached. They basically wanted it so people would be less likely to come and talk to them in shaping legislation or rules through the executive branch. And that's where the problem lies. So if we can remove legislation and regulation, that's an easy fix. And there's a whole bunch of other things that we've come up with as ways to make sure we can continue to engage all of you to protect the environment and get dark money out of elections. And that's ultimately what we want to see, and fair disclosure across the board. So there's a link that Kristen put in the chat window. We'll follow up with folks who join the call. But if you visit our website and there's a take action spot, you'll see where you can send a letter to your lawmaker and ask them to please fix this bill like they had promised. The governor lived up to his end of the bargain. He signed it into law, and there is no fix. And there needs to be a fix. So the court's probably not going to be doing that work. We need the lawmakers to do it. And they seem to be a little less understanding of the concerns. And that's why we really wanted all of our core supporters here to have a chance to understand the details and what's at stake. This is really important. And they need to know that we're watching them and that we're not going to be fooled by headlines, that we understand that there is something gravely wrong with, I can list these groups, American Council of Engineering Companies, Chamber of Commerce of Southern Jersey, Chemical Council, Community Associations Institute, Commerce and Industry Association, Fuel Merchants Association. These are your gas stations that have been polluting across the state of New Jersey with their tanks leaking, Healthcare Institute, Insurance Council, Irrigation Association, NIOP, which is large warehouses, the Apartment Association, health plans, bankers, builders, business and industry, cannabis, Chamber of Commerce, Coalition of Auto Retailers, Council of Chain Drug Stores, credit unions, Dental Association, Food Council, your large grocers, Gasoline and C-Store Automotive Association, Independent Electric Associations, your Motor Truck Association, Retail Merchants Association, Society of CPAs, New York Shipping Association signed on to stop C6 from being disclosed, and the Utility and Transportation Contractors Association. These folks want to hide in the dark. And under this bill, the way it's structured, they can't. And that's where we really need your help. To get involved, to make sure the legislature fixes this. And they fix it by having a level playing field. That means we're all in the same place. What applies to us, it's good for the goose. Applies to them, it's good for the gander. And that's not what we're seeing today. Are there other questions from folks on the microphone?
Ed, we had a question online. Is the bill A1524S150?
Yes, I don't know about the A number, but the S150 is what was ended up being signed into law. That was through an emergency procedure. What they ended up doing, the bill was originally S1500, and when they were going to override the governor, the deal was they were going to introduce the same exact bill under a different number, send it to him again, and then he would just sign it into law. Because once he conditionally vetoes it, it can't become law without an override. So rather than the governor being overridden, Democratic governor with a Democratic legislature, the deal was we'll send you the exact bill. So it went from S1500 to S150. And let me just make sure that I got the other assembly companion right. Oops. Are there other questions? I can do that while I'm looking.
Other questions from folks on the phone?
I have a question. Kathy Sonay.
Hey, Kathy.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi there. Going back to your rocks versus bazookas, we have a lot of rocks. What about reaching out to every local political chapter, like every Democratic club or maybe every Republican club, reaching out to League of Women Voters, reaching out obviously to all the environmental organizations, and enlisting their members in your talking points, about the overreach, not about some of us being outed, but not all of us are being outed. And the whole thing about the C6s. What we haven't owned is the narrative. The dark money, the trade organizations still own the narrative. We have to change that.
We have been working with a lot of partners, on this issue, and we will continue to do that. And we've had some op-eds, we've had a lot of supporter calls, but I think you're right on. And if you guys can think of people that can help lend their voice to this, if you want to send messages to us, individually, that would be really helpful. We're happy to talk to them. We did do a similar webinar to this with other stakeholder groups so that they could understand the implications of the law, which went really well. It is sort of complicated. It took me a long time to wrap my head around a lot of these aspects and the major concerns. I've been at this now for 7 years in the nonprofit world and also doing elections with our political action committee and our super PAC. So I have a good understanding. Some of the local advocacy organizations or smaller interest sort of citizen groups may not have the details around the nonprofit law, but we're happy to work with them and help them understand what's happening here and how they can make a difference. Because I think with enough public pressure, we can actually get the bill changed. But without the public pressure, they're going to be laughing all the way to the corporate donations that fuel the politics in New Jersey. We'll just use that word. They're the biggest spenders. And the bill, the A number is A1524 or A100. It's listed both ways here on the NJ Ledge website. There's a question about the sponsors. The sponsors in the Senate, the primary sponsors were Troy Singleton, Linda Greenstein, and in the Assembly, Andrew Zwicker, Dan Benson, and Shavonda Sumter. And it pretty much got all yes votes with abstentions from both Democrats and Republicans. And I think a lot of that has to do with, in the headlines, how are you the legislator that wants more dark money? People are busy and they don't look at all the details. And I think it's reasonable to think politically voting against this bill is dangerous, could be dangerous for your election.
And Ed, to build on Stephen's question, from a national perspective, what we see typically is, I don't know the specific LCB scorecard ratings of New Jersey's sponsors, but generally the people who sponsor legislation like this are our allies. That the people who are trying to root out dark money and are in favor of disclosure are typically environmental allies, that they are progressive, good government people who recognize the problems of legislatures being captured by large corporate interests. And so whether it's in California or Washington State or any of the myriad places where they've passed really robust disclosure laws to root out some of this corporate and other and dark money influence, it tends to be environmentalists who are pushing the bills. The issue here, because as Ed mentioned earlier, this is an environmental issue. Trying to root out chemical industry money and the influences on politics that distort the political process is inherently an environmental issue, because it's what allows these companies and interests to undermine environmental protections. The problem with New Jersey's law is that the way it was written, the way it lets the 501c6s off the hook is unique, and it's a miss. And, you know, not everyone writes a bill the right way or listens to their allies when they're trying to get something through. But it tends to be environmentalists who do push these, and we always want to praise folks who are doing the right thing to root out dark money to protect the environment.
Are there any other questions that folks have? Well, I want to thank everyone for joining. I hope that we were able to give you a comprehensive overview of what's at stake, what's coming, how the landscape of New Jersey policymaking, that's legislation and regulation, will be changed in the coming weeks. We're going to keep a close ear to the rail to see what's happening with this Superior Court judge who is looking at a challenge to the law, and there should be a decision, hopefully, before it goes into effect on October 15th. Of course, as an organization, we're going to comply with any law that's on the books. I think, we really are asking for your help to spread the word about this. So if there are other folks you think would benefit from being engaged around this issue, we're going to have a recording of this we can supply. If you thought this was helpful, we'll take questions. We really need to make sure people understand and push back against these efforts to unlevel the playing field and target smaller grassroots organizations at the expense of good public policy. And that's what we're asking you to get involved with. I think by taking time today to join the call, you have already indicated that this is important to you, us as an organization in this issue. And I'm hopeful you can be our top recruits in working to advance a fix, whatever that looks like in the coming months, so that we can root out dark money, but also protect the public and make sure they're involved in the policymaking process. So with that, I think we'll just round out. Click the link, the secureeveryaction.com link, so that you can send a message to your legislator. I'm going to share my email real quick in the box and our phone number, so you can just grab that, and we'll follow up with an email to you all as well. This is my office line. Reach out, and we're happy to talk to you, to work with you, and share any ideas you can think of to help us make New Jersey a better place for our future generations, which means making sure we can be as active as we have been, and all the groups that we work with and are allied with continue to do the important work they do. So thank you guys again. Kristen, Alan, as always, thank you very much. And to all of you on the phone, we really appreciate all the support and time.
Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.